Mr. Justin Trudeau has graciously agreed to join me for a second interview. Mr. Prime Minister, it's good to have you back. Let's go back to last fall. There was a federal election, and you and your party won. But Andrew Scheer and the Conservative Party had over 1 million more votes than you, but lost, mainly because they did not get the votes in Quebec. What do you think about this?
Shouldn't have happened. I take responsibility for it.
What is one thing that you tried to do recently that made no sense at all?
Give grants for students who are volunteering.
I have to agree, Mr. Prime Minister. Paying volunteers seems like an oxymoron to me as well. You've been involved in multiple scandals. And because of this, do you think you would be re-elected as Prime Minister if an election were held today? Staying on topic here, what do you think about being the only Prime Minister in Canada's history who has violated ethics laws? And not once, but 3 separate times.
We're in an absolutely unprecedented situation.
Mr. Trudeau, what do you think is the most scandalous thing you have done since you have become Prime Minister back in 2015?
I apologize. It was a chocolate bar, but I apologize.
Well, I'm not sure that eating a chocolate bar in the House of Commons ranks up there with interfering in a criminal trial, but I guess that's your opinion. Moving on, what do you think is the most important part of your job as Prime Minister?
Photo ops.
You have obviously had a lot of contact with different leaders from around the world. What is the scariest thing that one of them has ever told you? Mr. Prime Minister, you are very well known around the world for your fancy socks. And one time you even wore a Superman costume to the House of Commons. Is there something you wish you could wear to work that is not currently allowed? Mr. Prime Minister, could we talk about the decision that you just made yesterday, in which you decided to prorogue Parliament in the middle of the pandemic and an economic crisis? What do you have to say about that?
Gives us an opportunity to look back at prorogation and of all that it is a symptom of, to avoid difficult question, troubling, to have seen over the past 4 years a culture of division, of cynicism, of secrecy, of lack of accountability permeate this House in its entirety.
Through this crisis, what has been your attitude towards the opposition parties who at times have had differing views on how to deal with certain issues?
Anyone who disagrees with this government gets pushed aside. And that applies as well to the opposition when they think they can get away with it. Because that's what this past prorogation was about.
Mr. Trudeau, what do you hope to gain by proroguing Parliament?
Every tribune, all the media, all the voices, all the attention, and gets to further marginalize people who disagree. That's why we're talking about prorogation today.
What do you have to say to Canadians who are worried about the future?
This is not a government who values their voices. Not a government who accepts easily the legitimacy that exists in every member sitting in this House who is duly elected.
I thought it might be good to break away from my interview with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and get some comments from the people who are closest to him. Although Bill Morneau has stepped down as finance minister, he has been very close to the Prime Minister since they were elected in 2015. Mr. Morneau, thank you very much for joining us. How does your government approach the critics, the people who don't agree with them, and the opposition parties?
We will drag along the Neanderthals who don't agree with that, and that will be our continuing approach.
Thank you very much for your insightful comments, Mr. Morneau. We are now pleased to be joined by the Minister of Infrastructure, Catherine McKenna. Minister, how does your government go about getting bills passed in the House of Commons when there's actually no proof that this new legislation will work, like banning certain types of firearms to prevent mass shootings?
If you actually say it louder, we've learned in the House of Commons, if you repeat it, if you say it louder, if that is your talking point, people will totally believe it, so just go it.
Thank you very much for those comments, Minister. We are now pleased to be joined by Chrystia Freeland, who in the past has held the post of Foreign Affairs Minister, but was just yesterday given the job of Finance Minister in replacement of Bill Morneau. Minister, how do you think it has been to work with Justin Trudeau, a man who has been found guilty of ethics violations multiple times like no other Prime Minister, and by all accounts could go down in history as one of Canada's worst Prime Ministers?
As I've said, I fully support the Prime Minister. It is a huge privilege for me to serve as Canada's Foreign Minister and to serve in his cabinet.
Mr. Trudeau, is there anybody in Canada that you have intentionally mistreated since you have become Prime Minister?
Do you want me to answer that question in English?
Yes, I would appreciate an answer in English, Mr. Prime Minister. And the question once again was, do you think there's anybody in Canada that you have intentionally mistreated since you have become Prime Minister?
Albertans and Saskatchewanians.
What reason do you have for doing that?
The best interests of the entire country.
When people like you say that, isn't it true that what you really mean is what is best for Quebec?
Oh, yeah. Indeed, indeed.